Welcome to BrandBusters with your hosts, James Schwinn and Sean Lee. Together, we bust open the latest in CPG, retail media, and life, or whatever the we want. And for today's episode, we got something special cooked up for ya. Extra spicy. Take it away, Sean.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. We've got episode 14 here, and we've got a great guest for everybody today. We've got Cody Griffin, who leads strategy, marketing, and ops for the D2C health and wellness brand First Day. Cody's a former management consultant with Bain, and Cody cut his teeth on the brand side with Dr. Squatch, probably a brand that everybody has heard about or knows quite a bit about, and he was the VP of marketing there. He also advised emerging and scaling brands along the way. So we're really excited to talk to Cody about his experience kind of joining, up and coming CPG brands and how he's been able to jump in and make an impact. So Cody, great to have you here today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, guys. Very excited.
And to start, I've got Dr. Squatch bar soap in my shower right now. But what I'm more excited about is, Cody's still repping. He's got the drinkware. Let's see that again.
Bar soap on the table.
Bar soap on the table. I've got some First Day vitamins right here. My kids, so I've got two boys, 5 and 3. Have been avid fans. We're subscribe and savers on Amazon. I actually like these things. They're phenomenal and make the Flintstone vitamins that we had to suffer through as kids, head and shoulders above those. So very excited. But I guess, Cody, to start, I know we go back a couple of years and you kind of got your career experience at Bain and management consulting. So I'm not sure if you've fully recovered from that. I hear mixed reviews, always great experience, but also it's a lot to bear. Kind of getting the inner workings of companies, though. Are there any principles from the Bain side or client side that you still kind of carry with you with each organization that you've joined?
Yeah. You never really recover from being one of those places by any means, but and you carry a lot of bad habits forward, I guess. It's probably the first lessons, but yeah,
a lot of 100-page PowerPoint decks, I'm sure.
100-page decks and 100-hour weeks. That's the general principle. I think that there are definitely some pieces, though, principles that have been really helpful for jumping into the startup world in particular. I think there are very big differences. First, in the startup world, most of what you need to do is execute, right? You're very much, flying as fast as you can to get shit done and make sure that it works and move on to the next, versus in the consulting world, you're flying as fast as you can, but it's to solve what you think might be the hardest problem for whatever big Fortune 500 business. But the principle in that is you need to identify those high value levers, right? And you have to focus your time and energy on the pieces that are going to have the biggest impact. So I think that is the first piece that I have carried forward, is being able to look at a situation, even if it's obvious that we need to execute, is to say, okay, what things should we execute on in what priority, right? And how far should we execute them before we move on? That has been kind of a really, really powerful tool within my teams and within my orgs to be able to say, okay, the juice past this point is no longer worth the squeeze. Let's move on. And that's definitely been a big piece that I carry forward. The other is, to some degree, the ability to look at the business model and say, okay, where are the opportunities for improvement, right? I think that one of the things that I thought about with Bain or with management consulting in general is it's relatively like residency for people running a business. You get to see every part of a company, and you have to figure out how to solve problems in every part of a company. And so when you come in to a new organization, you can identify, okay, where are the parts that are massively underperforming, massively overperforming, and therefore where should I index my time and energy? And in the startup world, in fact, if a business is staying in operations, some parts are massively overperforming. It's probably the right internalization. And so then that gives you the clue to say, okay, where else should I focus? So while my role, for example, at Squatch was marketing, I played a lot of time in margin improvement and a lot of time in, fulfillment. How do we think about making sure that those things are executing well enough so that the marketing engine can just steam and run, which was actually a very efficient thing when I got there. And that we continued to be able to scale, but that created unique pressure points on the rest of the business over time.
Yeah, I think that's incredible advice. I mean, for any of the listeners out there, I've seen it time and time again, whether it's management consulting. We've talked to a few people who have done that, working in a big company. Like I spent a decade at P&G in brand management. It's all the same concept. You learn how to like look at a business and diagnose problems and then prioritize what's going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
While it may not seem like that's going to directly correlate to a small company or a startup or even a different industry when you're in it, I think it's like your residency. Like you said, it's that small, or you're learning the fundamentals that you can then go apply to any business, regardless of the size, whether it's private equity funded, venture capital funded, or a mom and pop startup that you're acquiring. So I think just wanted to highlight that I think that's super incredible advice, especially for people junior in their career that may not think that, the 100-hour weeks or some of these crazy things they're doing for big companies or consultants are worth it. I think it ultimately pays off in the end.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think that like the biggest challenge that I've seen folks who come from that world and then try and dive into the startup world experience is, in that world, you come from a like system of hierarchy, right? Where you typically have to run your thought process and your analysis up the chain and get like buy-in. In the startup world, it's like, hey, I see this problem. The most helpful and most effective people in the startup world say, okay, I see this problem. I think this is how I should address it. Like, let me go build the system to address it, but also make sure that I can get some learnings out of it so that if it doesn't work, I can improve, right? And like that bias to action is actually probably the hardest piece for somebody coming from the kind of big corporate world to figure out how to live by. And one of the things that I've found is the most successful D2C and CPG brands have smart people with a bias to action, right? Like the unit economics, the business models, all of those things can be learned and are not that difficult. But if you have a bias to action, that usually means quick results, quick testing, and better learnings faster so that you can improve more effectively.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's huge. I think a lot of people struggle with that when they leave consulting or leave big companies, because you're still almost looking for that, who's going to approve this? I need that validation of somebody above me saying like, yeah, this is a good strategy, pat on the back, go do it. Versus in startups, you just got to go do it, and you got to go do it quickly and have that discipline.
For sure.
One question kind of dovetailing on that, on what we were just talking about, is what advice would you give to somebody coming into a fast growing CPG company like a Dr. Squatch or a First Day that is coming into the marketing department that isn't a founder? Like, how can they come in and, make an impact and figure out where they fit in the hierarchy?
Yeah, I think, everybody should understand your strengths before you go in anywhere. Like what do you think is the reason they hired you? Because there was a reason that you were brought on board, right? And then what do you think is the thing that they don't know about when you were hired? Try to take both of those things and deploy them as quickly as possible. So if the reason you were hired is because, you have a background in a very specific skill, like probably at a fast growing startup, they are like, hey, we have literally not done this yet. So go do what you know how to do, right? And don't seek out the, okay, well, what is the right way to do this? Because the reality is, especially if the company is doing, less than mid 8 figures, they almost certainly haven't deployed what they're hiring you to do, right? At a certain point, you start to get into specialization, and that's a different scale and phase. But like most people in the mid 8 figures are like net incremental skills and functions to the business. So come in and do what you know how to do. But the other piece is look at the whole business. Like if you're brought in, it's probably because they thought you were sharp enough in general. And look at the whole business and tell people, hey, this is what I see. This is what I've seen previously. I used to do it this way. Would you like me to give that a try and go after it, right? Like you don't need to go step on people's toes and like flex every muscle, but coming in with your perspective is actually super valuable, because one of the things that a founder or an early founding team typically lack is the like people outside of the ecosystem telling them this is why you should do it differently, or these are inflection points where you might need to change your behaviors. And bringing in new people serves that function for the organization to say, hey, we're at a new phase, a new point in our development, and we actually likely need to do things slightly differently at this point in order to enable and sustain that kind of growth that we've experienced to date.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense.
And kind of going off that, I think these first few questions are all linked together in one form or fashion. But you're talking about levers and understanding like the kind of power of triage.
Yeah.
I think organization, when you're at Squatch, we're omni-channel business. I feel like scaling across every channel you're active on. Which levers are most successful for you, like or channels even? Like, was it SMS? Was it things you're doing with email marketing? Was it social? Obviously, videos worked out fairly well. But which ones worked out well? Which ones surprised you for better or for worse?
Yeah, again, I think it depended on the stage. So early on, I joined Squatch like high 8 figures as a business, so it was an established org, in my opinion. But like the call it low tens of millions to mid 9 figures or mid 100 million range was like really enabled by very effective video marketing, right? It also happened to be riding the high value wave of people being stuck indoors and being able to put ads in front of people relatively cheaply, relatively efficiently, because it was all pre-iOS 14.
Yep.
But the uniqueness of the ads was that they were both performance and branded, right? And I think that matters in a way that is hard to articulate because they that large scale investment. I mean, we're talking, tens of millions in ad investment over the course of 18 months. I believe was a direct driver of success as channel expansion played out, because people didn't think about, oh, what is natural soap? People thought about this dude with curly hair who represented Dr. Squatch, right? And it was a brand. And when you got to Amazon or you got to Walmart or you got to Target, people were looking for Dr. Squatch the brand, not let me find natural bar soap, right? So the ability to build a performance-oriented brand and branded content for that early phase, I think paid constant dividends down the line, in my opinion. So that was one. Once you built up a customer base, I think there were two major other like levers that became very, very valuable. So D2C as a business model is, if CAC is not low, is very hard, right? As a standalone business model. And typically speaking, on a paid social mechanism, CAC these days is not low. So you either are reliant on AOV or repeat purchase rate, or ideally both, right? In order to make the unit economics work if you're going to stay just to D2C. And those were the channel, like the levers that we focused on ruthlessly. So first purchase AOV, what could we do to drive that higher to improve our first purchase payback? And then what could we do to drive up our share of customers who tried and repurchased, right? I wasn't focused on getting 4 orders to 5 or 3 orders to 4. It was the 1 to 2, because if you lifted the area under the curve, effectively the total pool of repeat purchasers, we saw that you had a very high probability of them making multiple future purchases.
That's great.
And so those 2 levers alone became like the core focus. SMS was a huge channel for driving the repeat purchasers. Squatch had a subscription model. It was pretty good, pretty big. And First Day has a really good subscription model, in my opinion. And that's a fundamentally critical one to drive up the repeat purchase. But for the one-time population, like, you have to deal with saturation, right? So you have ad saturation, you have email inbox saturation, you have even SMS saturation to some degree. So the key ways of reaching that audience are figuring out, how do I work through my cost effectiveness model and my cut through the noise model. So for us, it was SMS was both cost effective and mostly cut through the noise, because we could be very authentic to the brand voice. We could sound like the brand voice at Squatch was very much a your bro chatting with you in the text message, right? And so you could send silly, stupid messages that would get laughs, get engagement, and ultimately turn into purchases, which was a very high value outcome for us. The other thing that we found to cut through the noise on the returning side was direct mail. Direct mail, ultimately, especially for our audience of 18 to 30-year-old men, was very, very underutilized by other brands. And so we would see big jumps in our percentage of customers that would come back when we would send at the right engagement points. So that was the third component, which is figuring out like what is the right and real utilization based on what the customer purchased and when would they run out of their product. Because ultimately, like, I mean, the average 18 to 30-year-old is not brand loyal. Like they do not care about what brand they have. They're typically still buying whatever's cheapest on the shelf. They can be convinced to purchase things, and that's usually where really good advertising works. But the moment they get out of a product, they probably have not thought like, oh, I'm running out of my soap. It's time to go rebuy Dr. Squatch. They're thinking, oh, I'm out of my soap. Let me go to Walmart and buy whatever I need because whatever's on the shelf is and most valuable at that moment. So as we could figure out, hey, the customer who buys this assortment, like tends to run out at this window. Let's hit them, 10 days before that with a postcard that notifies them, hey, you're going to run out. Like, stock up. Here's a little bit of value. Those things became really, really valuable unlocks for us. So I think, summarizing the big ones were really like drive up that AOV. And we did that through a bunch of merchandising, a bunch of different tests online, and then drive up the repeat rate through like cutting the noise, but avoiding remarketing to these folks. We didn't want to pay to reacquire them if we could.
Yeah, I think that you said a lot of really incredible things there. First, just for the audience, CAC and AOV, CAC is cost to acquire a customer. AOV is average order value. I think most people listening probably know that, but I always like to call that out because for us, that's what we look at every day, and that's what we talk about. I was on brand manager on the Old Spice in the heyday when we were kind of irreverent and relaunching that, and I think it's probably lost a little bit of its cool since a decade ago when we were doing that. But I feel like Dr. Squatch is the modern version of that. And for what we found for guys 18 to 30, it's like the more entertaining and irreverent you could be, like the better chance you had to actually capture them. So we always said like, entertain first, educate later to try capture the sale. And that's usually what worked. So I think that's awesome. The guy that was in all the commercials, is he part of the team? Is he an actor? Or was he the founder?
He's technically, he's not a full-time employee. He is part of the team. His name's James. He's a comedian for his full-time job. So he'll do tours. He's based out of San Diego. He's a great dude. But he is still technically part of the team. So he's like commits to, always being available for videos and that kind of stuff in that way. But he's not like on the marketing team full-time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's so relevant. And then just for an actionable tip for the audience, and I don't know if you're willing to share, but for sending postcards and kind of triggering that, is there a vendor or someone that you use to write the rules and automate that? Yeah,
in the D2C world and Shopify ecosystem specifically, I think Postpilot has figured this out really well. Their integrations with other tech partners is like pretty top notch, and their team is really, really supportive in my experience. So they'll work through both the design of the postcards for you, as well as like the segment setup and the execution of the automation. So like it's pretty low lift for the brand in my experience, which is a huge value add from any vendor and highly incremental. They one of the things that I always appreciate is they'll absolutely always do a holdout test, and they will, like in their dashboard, unlike most places, they will have like what they would call their ROAS, but they will also deliberately call out, here's your incremental ROAS because we did a holdout group of, awesome. 20%. So like you can evaluate, do you think this is the right segment for you to roll and why not? So for me, I've really appreciated working with them. I've done it both at First Day and Dr. Squatch, and they've been great partners.
That's awesome. This is probably a little tactical and in the weeds, but is it similar to like a Klaviyo or an email flow system where you just go into their system and create a flow for when the postcards get triggered? Yeah,
honestly, they directly integrate with Klaviyo, so you can actually just do it in Klaviyo. You could add it to your flow, for example, and have I send 3 messages in my email flow and I capture folks there. And then if they haven't purchased by the end of that 3rd message, 2 days later, we trigger a postcard to go out, right? And it can go right from that audience or any given flow that you want. You can build it within your existing Klaviyo infrastructure, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I really appreciate that. It's always helpful to have some actionable tips for people.
Yeah, of course. I like working on both sides. I'm definitely not the best tactical marketer. It's not what I would call my set of strengths, but I've played around in each of these systems a decent amount just to try to figure out, okay, like how can I help my team think about using their resources and their time effectively? And that's definitely been a big benefit. So usually the post-pilot team will actually go through the exercise of building that for you in Klaviyo if you want. But if you wanted to like toy around with it, test it, put it into your own sequences, you absolutely can.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about first day for a little bit, give you guys some love, the spotlight. So I actually became introduced to the brand because I saw you start there and we go back a couple of years. However, reading into it more, I think really just kind of excited about the mission of it as someone that's historically taken a lot of different supplements, vitamins, and also having kids that actively resist eating their fruits and veggies, trying to help get them the right nutrients. And I think there's just there's a certain approachability of the brand. So for me, I know it's found the premise of including like essential nutrients, not a lot of fillers, artificial components. I mean, it even resonates to the packaging. I don't know how many people tune in via YouTube for Spotify, but very different. This does not feel like your sterile vitamin product. I've had my kids ask to use this as their toothbrush holder after we go through their gummies because there's like pictures of tortoises and cactus or cacti and other animals on it. But I guess it appeals. I know you have a kind of a range of a customer base, right? I probably started more on the premise of toddlers, expanded with some like prebiotic offerings for more like teens and adults. But I guess talk to us about what excites you about the brand. Where are you guys going? Where are you trying to solve right now?
Yeah, great questions. So yeah, first day for me, part of the reason I joined, I guess maybe I'll start there, is like I think the team has the right foundation for building the business. It's not like, yes, vitamins is supplements in general are a big market, right? Like that's a helpful piece if you're an investor and you look at a market like, okay, where am I going to potentially get a return for sure? But the team is not like, hey, let me go build every supplement in the market and think about how to, just capture a small share of a super long tail because they're all basically made the same and la-di-da-di-da. No, it's very much taking an alternative hypothesis, which is supplements should be serving a specific purpose. And the foundation of the brand was with a kid's multivitamin. That was the starting point. It's the yellow one you were just showing. And the foundation started from two principles. One, in looking at research, our founder had kind of explored and learned a lot about nutritional deficiencies, largely because of like experiences her family had growing up. And in doing that, she just was researching writ large nutrition and found out about this concept called hidden hunger. And effectively what this is as modern farming practices have evolved, where we now have kind of industrialized farming and then a long value chain to get to the grocery store and then into your home, like the nutritional density of any of your fruits and veggies is significantly lower than it was 10, 20, and really 50 years ago. Yeah. And so there are gaps, even if you eat a standard normal meal, relative to what you would have gotten in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, there are big gaps for the average child or average human today. Wow. And so the notion was, hey, I'm not here to tell you you need to go eat 200 or 300 or 400% of every nutrient. There's like a very clear set of guidelines around how much you should be consuming and why, but you're not going to be able to get that through your standard 2,000 calorie normal diet that you eat. So let's top you up and make sure that you get the basics of nutrients, because nutrition can be foundational to enabling so many other basic wellness components, whether that's happiness, fulfillment, sleep. All of those pieces can be supported by having your basic nutrient needs met, right? And so that's how the brand was started. It was started for kids specifically because in those early development years, that's really, really important. But we found that moms kept asking for, hey, well, we actually really want to try your product for ourselves because we see that our kids really like it. And it's very accessible to the points you were making, James. Like the gummy format tends to be the most accessible format. People don't usually like taking pills. People don't usually like powder mixes in their drinks because they have long, nasty flavors. So if we can get a format where you can get the delivery effective as well as like the bioavailability and the quality of the ingredients at the high and right level, then that became very valuable. So for me, that was like a very interesting and intriguing lens to come to this because it had a brand position, right? Like there wasn't when I look at the big players in the market, you have like, if you look at the legacy players, you have like Nature's Bounty, these giant yellow, like plastic bottles with yellow tops and things. Yeah. And they literally make every letter vitamin on the market, and you can just like go buy it, right? Or you have newer players like Ollie, Smarty Pants, and they make like a multi plus this, a multi plus that, and you're like, they just like product proliferation and SKU proliferation just to try and like capture endless things. The goal here was very much not to do that. It was to say, hey, let me make a good multi that serves a very specific purpose and treats an audience the way we want, and then let me build a set of corresponding SKUs around it that build a full ecosystem where you can take them together or independently, depending on what you want to solve for. But they're never going to be risking you over supplementing, because we're very thoughtful and diligent about making sure you could take the products together. And they're going to be like instrumental in supporting you overcoming these challenges that are presented from hidden hunger. And that was like, for me, I wanted to go to a place that had a brand, had a stance, and had a point of view. And because I feel like that's foundational to driving long-term growth and value in any industry, especially a hyper-competitive one. In the CPG world, you're always in a hyper-competitive one, but vitamins is, in my mind, very competitive. So having a brand point of view is really important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think you guys have done a great job with the packaging, with the positioning, but in the space, like I've looked at potentially acquiring supplement brands. We partner with some with my current company. There's a ton of brands that, supplement brands that maybe reach 8 to 12 million in revenue. They have a good Amazon business, a good D2C business, and they kind of top out there.
Yeah.
How do you, as you think about marketing for First Day and really breaking through the noise of, all the supplement brands that use probably the same handful of contract manufacturers, how do you really break through that noise and make sure you don't get stuck in that, upper ceiling of the sea of all these random supplement brands that are stuck there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you went through our ad library, you would see probably one consistent trend. And that's building with a starting point of education. We're not here to say when we survey customers, and when you look at customer behavior in the aisle, customers do not know why they should be buying a specific vitamin, and they do not know what a specific vitamin benefit should be, right? And that's there are many reasons for that. One, there is this litany of SKUs from any brand, and so it becomes very hard to say, well, why should I be buying magnesium? Why should I be buying vitamin B12? A multivitamin sounds good, so I'll try that. Right? That's typically where the customer defaults if they're not super well educated and spent a lot of time doing self-research. So the other portion of their lack of education typically starts from, they know that the category is known for snake oil, right? Literally selling snake oil. And so you have to overcome a series of biases against the product in general. And so for us, that starts with education. Hey, the education should not be, we're going to promise you X, fantastic results in 24 days. That's not a reality. That's not what we're selling, right? We're not selling ibuprofen that is clinically proven to shrink inflammation. That's not the point. This is a long-term investment in your own well-being, and starting with some of the foundations around, hey, these are real facts that you are facing today that are tied to long-term symptoms that you or your children are feeling, and building from that awareness around the problem, and then presenting ourselves as, hey, we believe we have built the right solution for the long term around this if you build the habits. But the education component, I think, around the problem, the why and how a supplement works, and not that it will promise some outcome in a short period of time, primes the customer to say, you know what, I have to give this a try. It's also not something where at any given moment I should expect an immediate response, because it's not intending to drive an immediate response. So it helps the customer stickiness when you lean into that education on the front end. And that drives, I think, if you can build a good recurring business, that's ultimately, I think, how you get over the hump of that, $8 to $12 million max point, because otherwise you're relying on first purchase payback, and your scale is only so much that it can be in that world, and that becomes highly difficult, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if you don't have the education or loyalty, whether you're buying magnesium from this vendor or another vendor, or maybe you read something else, it's pretty easy to switch around based on price or a variety of other factors.
100%.
No, I think that insight's really great on the education piece first, because I would say James and I are probably like very educated consumers, have been in the fitness and nutrition probably most of our life, or most of our adult lives at least. And even me, I'm like, sometimes I don't know, should I be taking things? How much should I be taking? Like, what's the literature say? I did a DNA test recently that was kind of focused on like, do I have any deficiencies in processing vitamins, things like that. Could be snake oil, I don't know. But it, like, for me, it kind of framed up like, here's some of the things that I at least know that I need that I'm probably not getting from my diet or that I don't process as well. But most people aren't doing that.
So I mean, most people aren't doing their annual physical and getting their blood work done. So like that alone is a foundational information point if you have it. But like, it's it takes a lot of work to help people understand what is nutrition, period, right? And it's not an obvious solution, and there isn't a perfect solution for one-to-one in the market. There isn't a right solution for every person, or the same product is not right for every person, right? Like, and that's another component of this is like, it may not work for everybody, but building that, the other side of that equation then is, if it doesn't work for everybody, you need to build like an authentic and good customer experience so that you are respected as a brand in the world. Like people, we find a lot of folks like will try us for a few months. Ultimately, for whatever reason, one or another, they go choose another brand, and then they come back to us, whether that's because they think the experience is better with us, the brand, like the way we treat them is better, or the product is better. There are a variety of mixes when you survey those folks around those three reasons. But like, if you're not doing the right business practices, you're also going to hurt the long-term value of your business, right? And that's another side of it, in my opinion.
That's great.
Sean, I'll keep going. I've got a list. I got a list of questions to pelt them with. So I think I've got two more questions for you on my end before we get you off the hot seat, Cody. So we talked a lot about Squatch. Really phenomenal stuff with what you're doing at First Day. Excited to see what else comes in the way of like line extensions and other types of products and offerings for you all. Any other brands that are kind of on your radar, brands that you admire? I see you're pretty plugged in, being in LA with a lot of the kind of CPG scene. Any brands that you want to kind of shout out or support for listeners?
Yeah. So on the bigger brand side, I'm an avid mountain biker. That's like probably my number one favorite activity. And there are two brands that are kind of like the polar opposites in the mountain biking world, similar to like your Monster and Red Bull, where they're attacking effectively two very different segments of the customer base, but both D2C and both doing it very well, in my opinion. So first is YT. They would be like your Monsters. They are very much looking for the athlete who is kind of like the screw you mentality and go after it. And then you have another brand, Canyon. They make all kinds of bikes, not just mountain bikes, but they're very much like the polished, unique, kind of high value, high production quality brand. Both of them make great products, but very different brand presentations. And the reason I like it is they are very much using brand as a mechanism to drive performance, right? I think in the D2C world, and in marketing today, there is no such thing as like existing without performance on your mind. But both of these guys take the playbooks from Monster and Red Bull, frankly, and use content as their king, right? They're very much about how do we build an awareness and excitement so that when the customer is in the period to buy, we are the first brand they think of, right? And that's what they optimize around. That's very much like building a core audience and doubling down on that core audience means that they're isolating a lot of people, but that audience is ready to buy their product when they're ready to buy, period, right? And so they don't have to spend so much on the direct response, convincing you to purchase, which is a great thing in my opinion. So that's like the big brand world. There's a brand here in LA that I think is doing really, really well. They're also in the supplement space. They're called Neuro. They are they started as a gum and mint brand, and they add like nootropics. They add like some caffeine, some other stimulants in their like awake and energy ones. They have a calm one, they have sleep ones. But they're founded by two guys that I actually went to undergrad with. Really, really ambitious, friendly, and like supportive folks, which I think have done just a fantastic job. They are scaling really, really well. They were an Amazon first brand with a D2C offering, but very much scaling through Amazon, and then have now been adding retail at a rapid clip in many doors. So you'll probably be able to find them. They get shouted out on Joe Rogan, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times a year because he just loves their product, which is
I'm sure they get a massive pop from that too.
It's just like an immediate
that's a
spike.
great audience.
They showed me one time, they're like spike in the 2 hours after the episode releases. It's like all of a sudden they have, a like 100x multiplier on their volume for that hour, and then it's like scales back. And then actually there's a coffee company in New York called Wynn Coffee Supply. Their founder, Sarah Wynn, she's like, I think the biggest multiplier I have ever met. So if you talk to her, she will happily be like, oh, let me put you in contact with all these people. Let me help you in every way. That's her orientation, is like, we are all doing things to lift up small brands, period. And she is having, in my opinion, like massive success and growing and building, frankly, a net incremental category, so I don't know if you guys know coffee really well, but like almost all coffee in the world is Arabica, or all the coffee that you would normally drink is a specific type of bean called Arabica. In Vietnam, they mostly grow Robusta beans, which are historically treated as like just not that good. They don't bring the same flavor profiles, and therefore like the third wave of coffee has mostly ignored. She's all about how do we elevate and get people to understand the nuance of this type of bean, and therefore grow an entirely incremental category, which retailers love because you're not taking away from product on shelf. You're saying, hey, here's a net new driver of customer base and audience. You are, your customer base, her customer base loves it because she's able to connect and resonate with a net new like presentation of a product that people haven't really tried before. And I think, in my opinion, she's just done like a fantastic job from a brand perspective. PR is lights out. And like, if you're trying to build your own business through a PR model, like somebody to emulate and watch is how she's done that. So yeah, those are probably 3 that stick out on top of my mind.
That's amazing. I love the spirit of giving back and lifting up other brands like that. The impact from a downline standpoint, because the amount of hurdles that any founder, it's so much to put yourself out there and bet on yourself day after day, knowing all the fires that are going to come up, and you have to be that resilient because everyone's looking to you in those times of trial. So that's amazing shout outs. And everyone needs to try Wynn Coffee as the distribution increases.
For sure.
Well, there's something else I think you've posted about in the past, but this concept of misogi, it's this Japanese practice of doing kind of one defining thing annually, typically something very challenging. Like how did you get into this? What was your misogi of 2024? Have you done it yet? Like what? Yeah, tell us more about this, because I think this is this ties into being steadfast and resilience by like pushing ourselves in those hard situations. So when you post about this, I'm like, I love that. We need to hear more about this.
Yeah. So I learned about it through this guy, Michael Easter. He is a journalist, but wrote a great book that I'm totally blanking on the name of, but I'll send it to you and you can add it in the footnotes or something. But he also is a frequenter for Huckberry, which is like a marketplace for like menswear and outdoor goods. And so he has an article all about misogi on there, which is like a subset of this book that I read, and definitely worth reading. But basically the concept is, you try something very, very hard every year in a way that it pushes you beyond what you thought was possible. And in doing so, it opens up your tolerance of hard activities and your willingness to take on incrementally unique activities. That just opens your mind a little bit, is the basic principle. And he talks about, there are a couple of rules. Rule number 1 is like, you can't die. So you have to set it up so that you have a safety net, a mechanism to get out effectively. And rule number 2 is you have to have less than a 50% probability of succeeding. That's basically the guidelines behind it. And so like for one of the examples that somebody gives in the book is like, if you're a fit person, running a marathon is probably not a misogi. Like you probably could get through a marathon if you have done, you know, if you've run 10 miles, you probably could go finish a marathon. You would not feel good, and you would like definitely be hurting for a long time, but that's not a Musogi. You're not going to be really stretching yourself to a point where you're like, I have to stop. The equivalent for somebody who is in relative fitness might be, I have to go run 50 miles. Okay, like that's a very different proposition, and you probably will fail, but it's worth giving it a try. So there are three Musogis that I really want to do, one of which I had scheduled for April, but my do not die backed out. So this was a buddy and I were going to run this trail in the like Southern California coast called the Backbone Trail. It's like 70 miles and 15,000 feet of elevation. But after like 2 months before we were going to go, my buddy basically broke his knee, so was unable to do it. And I wasn't confident going solo that I would not die, so I backed out on that one. So my brother and I have scheduled another one, which is later this. I think we're going to do it either in like late fall or early spring, but it's to do the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim, which is to go from South Rim to the North Rim and then back in one go, which is I'm probably almost certainly going to fail, but we'll just set up a tent at the bottom.
Are you? Is it a hike? Or are you running? Is it?
No. I would not be able to run the whole thing. Like a fast walk hike. You know, it's like probably the distance on that is give or take 45 miles, depending on the route you go, and the elevation is about 7,000 down and up each way. So it's about 14,000 over 47 miles or something. So yeah, I definitely will not be running, but maybe like the equivalent of a very long hike. And then the third one,
that one's on my radar to do it once, not the once and back. That's that'll be an aggressive one.
We'll see how it goes. I probably will get to, if I get to the other side, I'll probably say I'm done and I'm not going to make it back. Right? That's the point of the Musogi. It's too hard, not going to finish it. And then the third one that I have like wanted to do since I was in college, I learned about it then and I haven't tried it yet, is they have these 3 peaks in Southern California that are called the 3 peaks. There's San Antonio, which is like known locally as Mount Baldy, San Jacinto, which is in Palm Springs, and San Gorgonio. These peaks are all like 10,500 or taller. And there is a relatively exclusive club. There used to be like an outdoor store across Southern California. They've now closed, but it's called Adventure 16. And they had like this like celebrity wall basically on every one of their stores of the people who shopped at that store who also completed the 3 peaks in 24 hours. And they're pretty brutal peaks. So like San Jacinto, as an example, is the single highest elevation gain hike you can do in anywhere in North America. So it's not, the peak is not taller than McKinley, obviously, but from bottom to top, you're gaining over 10,000 feet in one hike. It's wild. You go from basically sea level to 10,800. San Gorgonio, each of these is like a 20. San Gorgonio and San Jacinto are over 20 miles each, and then Baldy is like a 10-mile round trip. So it'd be a hefty day, but that's the third one on my list if I could figure it out. So those are my like next few years of Musogis probably.
Wow. I think Sean and I are going to have to do we'll have to do a follow-up episode one after you've survived which of the 3 you picked and endured. But now I need to get something on my list. Sean, I know you did Kilimanjaro a decade ago, but
I don't know if I've ever said something like to the 50% failure rate, which I think is a really interesting mentality. I did in my 20s. I used to do this a lot more. I've got 3 kids now, so some of my physical Musogis are probably on hold until they get a little bit older. But I did a 100-mile bike ride through Death Valley. I think it took me like 10 hours. I almost failed that one because it was, I think by the time I finished, it was like 128 degrees that day. And then
I don't know when this is going to come out, but there's a running race that starts in Death Valley called the Badlands 120, where they leave. It's, I guess it was this week. They leave at like 8 p.m. and they run from Death Valley to Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the lower 48. They run up to the portal, which would be like basically the lowest point to the highest point in the lower 48. And they do it in like, it's 120 miles. They do it in like less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
These guys are machines. And this week was like 123 degrees in Death Valley.
Yeah, that's crazy. When I was doing that bike race, there was a guy, one of the guys that does that, or I think he was one of the like finalists for that. I can't recall his name, but he was out there by himself in Death Valley as we're like in this bike race with a ton of people and a ton of support tents and in vans and everything else, just running by himself in like whitey tidies and like a headdress, like he was in the Sierra and like nothing else. And I was just like,
my gosh,
how like I can't even imagine doing that.
No, that's wild. What do you got on your radar, James?
Yeah, I don't have anything on my radar. I've got some homework to do, so I'll come up with something good here eventually.
Yeah, I have the advantage of no kids right now, so you can just come up with ideas that you'll fail at.
You can do a lot of you have a lot of time that you can fill on some pretty outrageous stuff when you don't. That's for sure. Yeah, I would say, James, unless you have anything else, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned a ton. I hope our audience learns a ton.
Yeah, I mean,
I really
appreciate a complete
treat.
Yeah, Cody, thank you so much. This has been great. Always enjoyed catching up with you. So thanks for sharing your wisdom and experience with everyone, and always good to hear from you.
Yeah,
and
thank you guys.
And like always, if you liked the conversation or found it helpful, you can go to LinkedIn and follow our friend Cody Griffin, follow James and myself on LinkedIn, X. I still call it Twitter because I have a hard time calling it X. And go to Spotify, go to YouTube, subscribe to the podcast. And if you found it helpful or you think a colleague or a friend would find it helpful, please share this episode. We don't do this right now for any sponsorship dollars or money. It's really just to have great, engaging conversations where we learn a ton and we help the audience learn a ton about CPG and e-commerce. So appreciate all the listeners who tune in each week and all the guests that come on. And with that, we will head to the outro and see you for the next episode.